Hello, everyone. I'm Congresswoman Sheila Cherfilus-McCormick, and I'm honored to have you join us for this important discussion on mental health in the Caribbean American community. Today, we're fortunate to be joined by Dr. Judith Joseph, a board-certified psychiatrist who brings a wealth of knowledge and experience in the field of mental health. We will discuss some vital aspects of mental health in the Caribbean American community, including the stigma that keeps many Caribbean Americans from seeking professional care, available mental health resources, and the importance of community involvement in promoting wellness. This topic is incredibly important, especially considering the alarming statistics in Florida. Our state is ranked 4th in the nation for adults with serious thoughts of suicide. We must address mental health with the urgency and seriousness it deserves. By raising awareness of these issues and providing practical advice, we hope to empower our community to take action, seek support, and understand that mental health is just as important as physical health. Welcome, Dr. Joseph.
Thank you for having me, Congresswoman.
Thank you so much for being here. We want to hear more about what could we bring to the table to make sure we can peel back the stigmas.
It's really important to acknowledge the stigma. And I use this acronym called CARIB because I think that many times in our community we think, okay, mental health is not our thing, it's not our issue, that's another culture. Actually, there are a lot of elements of mental health within our community, within our culture, and I think we need to be reminded of that. So I use this acronym, CARIB. It's not the bear in Trinidad, but it's actually an acronym that represents us. The C is community. So when we're in our old country, you know, we have our neighbors, we have our family. It's easy to stay connected. We have our church. The community is really important because it helps us to uplift ourselves. You know, loneliness is an epidemic. The Surgeon General just said that. And this is a global epidemic. So when we leave our communities in the Caribbean and we find ourselves in other countries, other parts of the world where we don't have community, then we feel disconnected. And this is where some of the mental health issues really step in. So acknowledging the importance of community is so important. Community could be your family, it could be your church, it could be people within your culture, but stay connected to the community. And that is a part of our culture. The A in CARIB has to do with attitude. Now, we know that gossip is harmful in our community, and we have to shift the attitude. If someone has depression or anxiety or a mental health issue or substance issue, we start to gossip, oh, you saw so-and-so, they're doing this, they're doing that. That attitude has to change or else we will have no progression. So we have to shift the way we think about mental health issues, not just in adults, but in elder communities. Dementia is a huge problem within Black communities. And if we don't talk about dementia as being a mental health issue, if we don't stop hiding our older folks and hiding their issues, then how can we spread awareness and prevention? And in our youth, the attitude needs to change as well. We say, what do they have to complain about? They came to this country, they have everything. Well, you know what? They came to this country and now guess what? They're a minority in this country, whereas back home they were not, right? People in positions of authority look like them. So they have challenges that the people at home didn't have. And our youth today are facing so much in terms of being overwhelmed with social media, technology, demands of school. So they have challenges that the older folks didn't have. So we have to really change our attitude. The R is ritual. This is my favorite one. So I mentioned earlier that, you know, in the Caribbean community, we say, we don't have mental health issues, we don't practice mental health, we don't need that. It's not true. When I used to live in Trinidad, every weekend I'd go to the beach with my family, put my foot in the sand, listen to the water, see the beach. That nature therapy is something called mindfulness in fancy schools of therapy here. We practice mindfulness every day in the Caribbean, but we called it something else. So mental health is inherent to what we practiced every day. We just didn't realize that that was a part of our mental health. The other thing was, you know, we would dance, right? In some of the therapy schools, we learned bilateral stimulation. Bilateral stimulation is something that we use to cope with stress. So in certain dance cultures, we do the whining. Guess what? We're moving bilaterally. So a lot of our culture actually has to do with mental health. We don't acknowledge it, and we need to start owning back, taking ownership of our rituals that helped feed our brain and our bodies. And the I is intention. So this is a controversial one, right? We have to do things with intention and be aware of the things that divide us. So there are 30 plus countries in the Caribbean, right? We have parts of Central America, islands. We're so diverse, and that makes us strong, but it can also weaken us because many times we'll be like, well, she's from that island, he's from that country. They're not like us. You know how they are. But we're very similar in many ways, and we will find more empowerment if we stick together instead of focusing on our differences. And think about slavery. The colonizers tried to divide us, right? So if we focus on the things that connect us rather than our differences in languages, our differences in dialects and foods and so forth, then we'd be stronger. And also there's a lot of colorism, right? We have people who are mixed looking and darker and lighter, and there's a lot of colorism. So we have to call these things out. There's a lot of bias towards LGBTQ plus communities, right? So being intentional about being inclusive is where our power really lies. And then the B is body. Right. So many of the folks that I work with will say, back home I didn't have any of these medical issues. I was good, and here I came to this country and I have all these problems. Well, no, just think about your behavioral patterns. Mm-hmm. In your prior country, you were eating certain foods that were not processed, right? You go to the fish guy, mm-hmm. you go to the milk guy, you get the fresh produce, you get the mangoes falling from the tree. But when you move to other countries, then the foods are processed. You're not moving as much, you're not walking as much, you're in cars. So be aware that your body has the needs that it always had, but you're not meeting those needs. And that's why we have high rates of health issues when we come to other countries. So be aware of that mind-body connection. Without a healthy body, you can't have a healthy mind.
That's wonderful. One of the things that we always struggle with in the Caribbean is how do we get our men to the table? Now, June is also Men's Health Month, and we've been talking a lot about men's health. And just like I know, Caribbean men have this machismo about them, this pride, and they always have to be strong. That perception has to be there. And trying to talk to them about, hey, your anxiety, how are you dealing with anxiety? First thing I hear is, oh, there's no anxiety? I don't have any of it, like it doesn't exist. And I'm like, no, what you're showing me is that you're nervous, you're anxious, your hands are swelling. And for older men, it's real, but it's also real for our younger men and our men who are in midlife. So how do we get them to see that, dealing with your mental health isn't a sign of weakness, but actually a sign of strength in the context of that strong machismo man?
Whenever you see someone being very strong on the outside, know that they are vulnerable on the inside. So they're doing that as a mask to hold it together, because it could be because culturally, they're not allowed to cry, they're not allowed to be vulnerable, they're rejected. If they show any sign of weakness, they have to always be strong. And empathy goes a long way. I remember I treated an elderly man a couple of years ago, and he was from the Caribbean culture, and he had a job back home that he felt proud to go to. He had a title. But all that was stripped away when he had to move to this country, because he had to create opportunities for his kids, and all of a sudden he found himself without a title, without respect, feeling really emasculated. Mm-hmm. And so he had to put on that facade of like, I'm the man. But it was a projection of the insecurity that he felt. So everyone else around him felt small because he felt small. And I think we need to validate that it's very difficult for underrepresented men in our country, because many times they walk into a place and they're immediately emasculated, they're judged. And they go through so much hardship that like other people will never understand. So approaching it from a position of empathy and understanding, and realizing that a lot of what they're trying to project is out of fear. Yeah. And I think we need to do a good job at renaming feelings, because many people don't relate to the word anxiety. Mm-hmm. They think that sounds like a medical condition, that it belongs to someone else, but words like stress are more acceptable. Words like healing are more acceptable than treatment in a lot of cultures. So I think that's where cultural competency really comes into play. And when I was a medical student at Columbia, I traveled to different countries in the Caribbean looking at their health systems. And what I noticed was that a lot of the patients would sit with their doctors and they use slang and be like, talking as if they're friends. And the doctors just got them. They would say, okay, take this high blood pressure medicine and also keep boiling your little herbs, right? Yeah. But here, you talk to a doctor about this stuff, you get shut down. So I think cultural competency is really important.
That's, I say that all the time. Like, our medicine has to include the person who you're serving. And the only person who can really do a good job of breaking that barrier is someone who looks like them, who's come from that. So investing in having people who have the right cultural competency for that patient, making sure it's customized so there's a connection, until we can create a platform where there's a standardization of what mental health is, what treatment is. But as long as we have a country with so many diverse backgrounds, we all see healthcare differently. We all see mental health differently. And I think that's one of the things we struggle with when we're trying to get our healthcare system right, is how do we do it for everyone? So the beauty of our diversity actually ends up being something that's a little complicated. But I really do think that if we actually embrace that complication, we become masters at it, and we can actually change the trajectory of the entire country. But I did want to lean into the family dynamics when it comes to, you have this dad or this man in the home who's macho and he's trying to deal with it. And now, as a child of first generation, growing up in the United States, seeing what America's like, understanding, hey, mental health is, important. And I do feel like my parents, who are strong Caribbean people, should empathize with me and give me, compassion and love. And so the children sometimes feel like, wait a minute, why aren't you giving me this? Or I'm resentful because you're not loving me in this, way that my environment is telling me I'm supposed to receive. And I always say to people, well, someone who doesn't have or hasn't experienced empathy can't give you the empathy that you're looking for. So how do we help bridge the generational gaps that are really gaps that are exacerbated by cultural and upbringing?
It's a great question. And if you want empathy, you have to model it. And this is what I tell the younger generations every day. You're assuming that your mother had the opportunities that you did. You're assuming that your mother had the education that you did. You're assuming that your mother had the conversations that you did, and that's a massive assumption. Yeah. You got to remember that your parents only had one chance to be a parent. No one ever taught it to them. They're doing this for the first time, right? We're all doing this thing called life for the first time. So really showing them compassion and understanding and listening. If you want people to listen to you, you've got to listen to them. And listen to your parents and talk to them about, what was it like for you to come into another country? What was it like for you to live here and make it on your own? You start to listen and you hear themes of trauma and you realize that this is unprocessed trauma, that they're sometimes cold because they're avoiding it, because one of the symptoms of trauma is avoiding the painful memories so that you don't have to get triggered again. And as you see these themes and you understand that these are trauma responses, this emotional scarcity is a trauma response because they wanted you to be strong. They didn't show weakness because they wanted you to be strong in this strange country. They wanted you to make it. Then that empathy goes a long way. And that's why I create content that really speaks to immigrant populations, because there's nothing out there for them. And so they're looking for terms, they're looking to understand their family dynamics, and it's not in the textbook. Mm-hmm. And that's where, social media has bridged the gap where people are looking for answers and you're not finding your face, your story in a textbook, but you're finding it online. And these are places, these are communities that people talk and they share information. And I posted a reel on scarcity trauma about how people from other countries sometimes come here and they're so afraid of losing it all that they may reuse paper towels, they may hoard bags under their sink, they may have a hard time getting rid of old clothing. They do these things out of a scarcity mindset rather than an abundance mindset. Even though they have resources, they're constantly afraid of losing it all. And I wish that people could see the comment section. It's like a group therapy in there. People are saying, my mom is like that and my dad is like that. And then they're healing each other. They're having conversations. So if you're not finding what you're looking for in your family, there are people out there who will hear you and validate you and give you pointers.
I'm so happy you talked about the trauma, because that is something that I think we don't like to address. And our story, and I say our story because being a first-generation American, there is a trauma that comes with coming to a new country. And I think a lot of people don't realize that that generation that first migrated here, they have so much trauma. And as they're aging, we're starting to see that trauma. And so, my husband, he's American. And so his dad was in Vietnam. And as he got older, he passed now, he had dementia. And so his trauma was more so towards scarcity. So he would actually hide fruit in his pockets because, he used to hide food in case he got hungry or if he was starving. So we would find like apples underneath the pillow. We would find oranges in his pockets because he's hiding food. But with my parents as they're aging, being that they came from Haiti, what I'm finding is that their trauma is really based on politics. So as they're watching TV and they're watching CNN and they're watching Fox News all day, they hear trigger words like, I'm going to be a dictator for a day. And then they're also all of a sudden, oh, he's serious, there's going to be a war. They go back to the place of when there was a dictator in Haiti where Duvalier was, or when they hear any kind of unrest in the United States. It creates nightmares for them now because they're thinking about the political unrest that had them flee their homes. And so as I try to talk to them through about the trauma, like how can we deal with this type of trauma, they don't even recognize it as that, but they're suffering silently with nightmares, with night terrors, and just seeing it all day, the obsession with TV, because they feel like in any moment, the U.S. now can be a reflection of Haiti having a war. So I would love to hear about how you feel about that.
It's so important to have people like you in these positions because diversity matters, representation matters, and you get it. You understand that sometimes people make decisions in terms of choosing their leadership that doesn't really fit in terms with their, aligns with their beliefs, but they're doing it out of a scarcity mindset. They're afraid. They're going with something that they know versus something that will actually be good for them because it's a known enemy, it's a known threat. So I'm just going to go with what I know because it's safe. I know what's going to happen. So, understanding that dynamic is so important. And what I see with these populations, like your father-in-law who passed, and I'm so sorry for your loss, is that they end up cheating themselves out of joy in life. They work, so they never have to need again.
Yeah.
And a lot of these people come to this country and then they develop scarcity trauma. They have scarcity trauma. They develop high functioning depression. They just work so hard. They don't really listen to their needs. They have a lot of money, they have a lot of resources, and they don't actually spend it because they're so afraid of losing it all. Or they'll push their kids to do 3 and 4 degrees because any minute now, whatever you did isn't good enough. You got to keep excelling because we have to be the best. We can never make mistakes. So you're breeding this very anxious generation. And then you're saying, well, what do you have to be anxious about, right? So understanding where all of this comes from, that it is born out of generational trauma, allows us to reflect, to challenge, and then to change. And it's so important that you get it because a lot of people don't get it.
So, in some countries that didn't have like a turbulent political society or governmental society, there's another trauma that I think everyone in the Caribbean faces, and it's that separation anxiety and trying to understand, why was I chosen to be separated? When I saw Bob Marley's film that just came out, and you saw the trauma that he went to being left behind, and his mother going to America and trying to create a life to take care of them, it made me realize that that trauma exists for every Caribbean person who is in that situation, because either they sent their kids first to give their kids a chance in the United States and they stayed back, or they came into the United States to work to send money back. But the truth is, there's that separation, and children are trying to understand, why me? Why was I left? Or why me? Why did you send me? And so how do we resolve some of those issues? Because those children are now adults, and those adults are now geriatric, and sometimes they're actually acting out that, that disconnect, that anger towards that parent who left you, or that, why did you leave me here? So how do we get them to even recognize that and deal with that part of the story that hasn't been told about what it feels like to leave the country because of economic necessity and even break up the home?
It's very tragic. And it used to be thought that, okay, from 0 to 2, a kid doesn't know anything. They don't even know how to speak properly. They won't remember that, but we're learning that's not true. In fact, those are the key years when you are starting to attach to someone, where you're realizing that this mother figure, this father figure, they're going to leave the room, but they're going to come back, and I can depend on them. But what happens when they leave the room and they never come back, or they don't come back for 10 years, and how detrimental that is to forming that attachment? And this is where education really comes into play, learning about attachment styles so that you raise your children in ways that form healthy attachments. If children don't attach, they end up becoming avoidant. They have a hard time in relationships. They may become leaders who are disconnected from their organizations, leaders who are disconnected from the community and causing harm. So understanding how attachment plays out is important. And it's not to say that if you don't attach properly, you're done, there's no hope. We're learning now that in therapy and through healthy attachments later in life, you can repair that. It takes time, but all is not lost. So yes, it's more difficult because if you had healthy attachments, you knew that your parent was going to be there, that they were going to be, providing a safe, secure environment for you, validating you, reassuring you. Yes, that's ideal, but many people don't have that, and it's never too late. I think we need to learn about it. And a lot of these concepts were thought to be high level, but no, they're throughout the world. It doesn't matter who you are. You could be in a village without internet and never see a television. Attachment theory plays out there because you're a human being. Yeah. So learning about how important it is to attach can actually, I think, save lives, because I think people will be more connected to their communities. They're not going to do harmful things for their community, and they'll want children to grow and thrive. Mm-hmm. But if you're someone who was never connected as a child, if you didn't have that opportunity, then you're not going to have that empathy, and you're going to be like, well, let them figure it out. They can figure it out on their own. No one ever helped me. Mm-hmm. That story, I tell you, I watched that movie twice. I went to the movies twice because it just really hit home for me, because I hear a lot of stories about people not knowing their fathers, not knowing their mothers, and how they had really disruptive, unhealthy relationships, and how they focused on their careers instead. Mm-hmm. And I think if everyone understood the power of that attachment, then they would stay with their kids a little longer. They would listen to their kids, they would play with their kids more, because playing with your child will make a healthy adult, right? You can put your kid in school and give them the best education, but they're not healthy emotionally, and we need to be balanced in that way.
It's so interesting that you say that, because I feel like as a Caribbean woman, our priorities are education, work. You know, it's so much of a priority that you are defined by your education and your work. And when you say, I'm taking some time out to play with my kids, they're like, what? I can't brag to my friends about you taking time out to play with your kids. So it's even like stature-wise, it brings you down a notch. And the sacrifice that your parents have done for you, because they always remind you of that. I sacrificed so much to get you this education, to get you here. And the expectation is that you sacrifice even your joy and happiness to now do this service, you know, to make them proud. So with all of these things we talk about, and as we're getting closer to closing, what could we do, or any points that you would give us, especially Caribbean American people living in the U.S. at this time, the multi-generations that we have, how can we help us actually get the help we need? And where would those resources be able, where can we go for those resources?
Well, I think validating that those resources are not there for us is important, so we have to go out and hunt for them. A lot of the research, it doesn't really include us specifically. It includes us in a lump, but doesn't look out for us as groups.
But that's a big problem too, because now I got to convince people to say, hey, I need you to do this research and join this test group. And they're going to say, oh, you know, I can't do this research in this test group. Another thing I hear a lot also when we talk about mental health, my parents say, I'm not crazy. Are you trying to say I'm crazy? And I'm like, no, you're not crazy, but the same way you treat the body, we have to treat the mind. So how do we encourage them to do research or to be a part of a pilot, and that this is not something to stigmatize you, which is a big trust issue that we all have?
You know, mental health is not someone else's problem. It's not someone else's culture. I think reminding our community that this actually belongs to us. Yeah. You know, we have these practices where we light candles, where we smell smells, and then we use mindfulness practices, where we're in church meditating, right? That's all a part of mental health. We're just calling it something else, and it's not an other. And I think that when we honor our culture, we need to honor the fact that mental health is a part of our culture. The foods that we eat, you know, back home, a lot of those spices were anti-inflammatory. They were actually like medicine for us. So thinking about things and shifting that attitude, right, the A in CARIB, and shifting it and saying this is not an other, this is actually us, is so crucial. And we have to do that intentionally. I also think that, you know, we have to acknowledge that the research doesn't include us. So we need to really support people in power who are looking for funding us, you know, because we need to have specific tailored supports and resources for us based on evidence. But what we do know that's out there lumps us in other groups that are marginalized, and we need to be able to utilize those resources because there are funds there. If you go to your state website, if you look to your Department of Health, there are free and also low-cost options for therapy. But we don't utilize it because we're afraid. We're afraid of the stigma.
Well, I love what you're talking about, because I never knew that the foods we eat with the spices are actually therapeutic. Because now when I leave here and I go eat my jerk chicken with my oxtail, I'm going to say it's therapy. But, you know, I also love how you talked about the symmetry of the body movement, you know, because even now, as being a member, looking to what can I do that I enjoy? And it seems like a lot of things that I enjoy are things that bring me back to like my childhood or in college when you were going out. And so knowing that Buju's back in the United States and having a concert, I think I'll be going to his concert as therapy. But I think these are things that would really change the game for us. And I would love to even look at that. How can we include some of these practices? Because I think it's something that we never thought of. Going to a concert, even in the community and dancing and celebrating the food, that it is therapeutic. So I really love how, you know, you brought it back to make it safe and okay for us to participate in it, right? Because dancing is not something that is forbidden for our culture. If anything, we like doing it. So if that means we should intentionally have more parties, then hey, I'm down for it, right? So are there any more things like that that we can say, hey, you know, let's get back to our own traditions. Let's get back to who we are naturally, that we can really push forward, especially for our men?
Well, when you approach it with intention, it goes a long way. It's not just, the doctor told me to do this. It's, I'm intentionally going to honor my culture and take care of my mental health because this is a part of my heritage. For our men, that is so important. So the men listening out there, when you're feeling low and you decide to put on some music, you put on some soca and you're moving your hips and you're going bilaterally, you're doing this to improve your mental health and well-being. It's science-based. you're thinking that the left brain is talking to the right brain, you're moving it, you're de-stressing, you're calming that fight or flight, right? That's so important. When you're praying, a lot of our men, they don't feel comfortable talking to a therapist, but they feel comfortable talking to God or a higher power. They talk to Jah. Yeah. That is mental health. That is well-being. That is wellness. That is a part of who you are. So be intentional about it and saying, I'm stressed today. I'm going to talk to Jah. I'm going to talk to God. I'm going to talk to whoever it is, right? And I'm going to vent, because that is so important. It's just like therapy, except, you're not sitting in front of a therapist. So I think that honoring your culture also has to do with not feeling emasculated. So a lot of our men come to this country where they grow up here and they feel like they don't have opportunities. Well, what do you have control over? Go and connect with someone who has a small business. Support that small business. Be intentional about it. I'm going to go to this coffee shop because this coffee shop is run by, my community, members from my community, entrepreneurs from my community. I'm going to intentionally support them, because what that is doing, it's buoying my sense of self-confidence and self-worth. So there are all these creative things that we can do when you do your hair in the morning. A lot of people, I had a client a couple of years ago who used to view washing locks and twisting it as being like a chore, and I'd be like, reframe. When you do that ritual, you are honoring your heritage. And they looked at it very differently. So when they go to twist their lock, wash their hair, they would actually listen to a podcast on mental health or listen to a book on mental health, right? There are all these different ways that you can honor your mental health in a culturally competent way. You don't have to wait to sit with a therapist. You can start doing it today.
Well, thank you so much for being here. I'm always so excited to have you, Dr. Joseph. Thank you again. Your expertise with us today was just awesome, especially the tips that you gave us. By addressing the realities of mental health in the Caribbean American community head on, we can help reduce the stigmas around mental health in the community and ensure that those in need receive the support they deserve. To everyone who joined us today, thank you for being a part of this vital discussion. Remember, mental health is a journey we're all on together, and seeking help is not a sign of strength or weakness, but it's actually a sign of strength. If you or someone you know is struggling, please reach out to the resources available on my website at Cherfilus-McCormick.house.gov. Together, we can make a difference and build a healthier, more supportive environment for all. Thank you again, Dr. Judith. You're always awesome. We would love to have you back here in Washington, D.C. Thank you for your expertise and all that you're doing to help us actually change the world and change policy when it comes to mental health.
Thank you so much for having me and for your leadership and advocacy.
Thank you.